Hello, everyone. I'm Buff English, and I'm here to buff up your English skills by giving you all the details you need to know about some of the world's best literature. Welcome to this short series about one of William Shakespeare's most famous plays, Romeo and Juliet. Although we often think of this as one of the greatest love stories, as you'll see, there's a lot more to this play than love. In fact, even though it's full of slick lines about love and beauty and attraction, the core themes of the play center far more on family, community, honor, and youth. Romeo and Juliet, if anything, is a play about the unadulterated ideals of youth and their collision with the realities of the darker adult world. The play begins with the famous prologue, a sonnet shared to us by a narrator, or chorus, and reveals to us everything that's about to happen in the story. So, spoiler alert, the prologue tells us that there are two houses, both alike in dignity, in the Italian city of Verona. These two houses have hated each other for a long time, but along come two lovers from each respective household who kill themselves and cause their families to finally make peace. It's interesting that the prologue positions Romeo and Juliet as star-crossed and misadventured, suggesting that their tragic story is more determined by fate and elements beyond their control, which is often a theme in Shakespearean tragedies. How much of their eventual outcome can characters ultimately control? The real action of the play begins, as many Shakespearean plays do, with minor characters introducing to the audience the major conflicts of the play. Gregory and Samson, two serving men in the house of Capulet, banter like young schoolboys about women and violence and tell us, "The quarrel is between our masters and us, their men." We never learn what the actual quarrel between the Capulets and Montagues is all about, but it also doesn't really matter. The characters themselves probably don't even know the origins or meaning of this ancient grudge. Eventually, Gregory and Samson pick a fight with two Montague serving men, but we have to take note that the fight mainly escalates because both sets of young men realize that one of their kinsmen is approaching and they have to save face and can't back down in front of the family. In this opening fight, we're introduced to two more important characters, Tybalt and Benvolio. We get the impression here that Benvolio, as his goodwill name suggests, is attempting to break up the fight. And we get the impression that Tybalt is interested in engaging in the fight, as Benvolio asks for peace and Tybalt tells him, "I hate the world as I hate hell, all Montagues, and thee." There are some cool lines in this play. At any rate, the fight in the streets escalates so much that both the Capulet and Montague households are aroused, and you get the impression that this is becoming a full-blown gang violence battle. Finally, as the violence reaches its peak, the prince of the city appears and yells everybody down. In this opening scene, he lays out what becomes a significant plot point, which is that any individual perpetuating the violence, their lives shall pay the forfeit of the peace. So he's really fed up with these guys. But the scene's not quite through yet. As the Montagues trot away from the scene of the fight, Lord Montague begins asking us to the whereabouts of his son, Romeo. And Shakespeare uses the last half of this scene to introduce us to the main character. You see, even though Romeo's family is glad he wasn't at this street fight, they are concerned that he's been acting, well, a bit odd lately. His father tells Benvolio, who's Romeo's cousin, that Romeo's basically been spending his mornings wandering alone, and then when the sun rises, he goes to his room, closes the curtains, and sits in the dark, probably crying a lot. So, yeah, Romeo is a little emo before emo was cool. But, like a good cousin, Benvolio promises that he'll be able to get out of Romeo what's bothering him. For as nice as Benvolio is, he knows the score and pretty much guesses the cause of Romeo's behavior right away. He asks Romeo if he's in love, and Romeo admits it. Romeo goes on and spins a string of paradoxes about his experience with love. Love is both a very elevating and transcendent feeling, but it can also be cruel, uncontrollable, and rather burdensome. Romeo's poetic language, we should note here, is unlike anyone else's in the play. And he speaks like this in lofty, romanticized terms about his internal experiences throughout most of the course of the story. Benvolio is a good cousin and patiently listens to and sympathizes with Romeo. Romeo can be quite the romantic downer. But then Benvolio proposes a solution that, of course, a young man would propose. By giving liberty unto thine eyes, examine other beauties. He basically tells Romeo that he's going to take him to look at other girls so he can forget this crushing love he's experiencing for the girl we'll come to know as Rosaline. What's that, you say? You thought Romeo was in love with Juliet? Oh, no, not yet. He hasn't even met her yet and doesn't know she exists. Romeo, that's right, begins the play utterly in love with a completely different girl. A lot of people are surprised when they find this out. I mean, I was. Wasn't this story supposed to be about the incredible power of love between Romeo and Juliet? Well, we'll get there, but remember that the themes of the play revolve much more around youth than love, or at least the youthful experience of love, which, as we can imagine, can be shallow and fickle at times. At any rate, Romeo is introduced to us as a heartsick lover boy. Before we move on to the other scenes of Act 1, it's important to note Romeo's context. Notice how every other member of his family is involved in heated violence and a never-ending ancient grudge. Romeo's experience seems to be one that rejects his family's insistence on perpetuating this, and instead he lives in a very internal, aloof world, rebelliously seeking love in a community of hate. So that's scene 1. In scene 2, Shakespeare swings us over to the Capulet household where we find Juliet's father, Lord Capulet, conversing with a man named Paris. Paris, it turns out, is rather wealthy, well-connected, and handsome. And he's in the middle of asking if he can marry Juliet. Capulet is reluctant, however, revealing to us that Juliet is, yes, just 13 years old, which in their day and age, girls were already happy mothers made by that point. But Capulet slightly relents and tells Paris that if he can win Juliet over and get her consent, he can marry her. We are then told that Capulet is hosting a party that very night where Paris will have the chance to woo Juliet. Except when Capulet gives his servant a list of people to invite, this list falls into the hands of Benvolio and Romeo. Romeo is excited to learn that his love interest, Rosaline, will be in attendance, and Benvolio is excited to challenge Romeo to compare Rosaline to all the other beautiful young ladies there. We see something of the boyishness of the characters in this scene and others like it. Although Romeo can come off as a super serious romantic, Shakespeare reminds us through many playful banters that Romeo is also just a teenage boy having fun in the streets of Verona. And while you can imagine Romeo in this scene somberly devoted to his ideals of love, we can also easily imagine a more upbeat Romeo jesting back and forth with his cousin. At any rate, we are quickly shifted back into the Capulet household, this time finally introduced to Juliet. Well, sort of. Juliet's mother is nervously about to ask Juliet about how she feels about getting married, and Juliet's energetic nurse interjects at length and offers a comedic, rambling monologue. Juliet, we can imagine, is sitting somewhat passively and overwhelmingly as these two domineering women in her life overshadow her. Juliet's mother finally gets around to bringing up marriage, and although we don't actually hear much from Juliet in this scene, she does reveal to us that marriage is an honor I dream not of. But if her mother insists on checking out Paris, then she'll at least check him out. If anything, Juliet's age, which is again brought up in this scene, and her accompanying innocence are what we're really observing here. Not only does her father say she's not ready for marriage, Juliet herself confirms this for us. She's not yet interested in romantically tethering herself to a spouse and is most likely more interested in living out her childhood a little longer. But thanks to invested parents and a handsome, rich suitor, the pressures and expectations of adulthood are already knocking unwelcomingly on Juliet's door. Romeo and Juliet are on the verge of meeting, but they haven't met just yet. Shakespeare first gives us Romeo walking to the Capulet party alongside his friends. You can imagine a small troop of boys laughing and jesting as they excitedly walk towards a fun event. But this scene's principal task is to introduce the audience to Romeo's life-of-the-party friend and the prince's kinsman, Mercutio. We all have one of those friends who's quick to make a joke, tell a story, and have the kind of good time we wish we were brave enough to. That's Mercutio. But this introductory scene shows that there are two sides to this witty fellow. On the one hand, Mercutio makes light of Romeo's attempts to be dramatic and tells him, "If love be rough with you, be rough with love." This is the opposite of Benvolio's more consoling presence, and to be honest, Romeo probably benefits from having both types of friends in his life. But Mercutio then oddly starts to go off about Queen Mab and descends into an incomprehensible, angry monologue that ends with Romeo cutting him off and having to calm him down. It seems like Mercutio, while capable of great entertainment and hilarity, is also capable of feeling the other, darker end of his passionate nature as well. It's in this serious moment that Romeo then reveals to his friends the dream that he had been trying to tell them about, which is an oddly accurate and foreboding sense that some consequence yet hanging in the stars shall bitterly begin his fearful date with this night's revels, and expire the term of a despised life closed in my breast by some vile forfeit of untimely death. But even despite sensing that whatever is about to happen will kill him, he forges on to the party. Now, Finally, we get to the scene where Romeo and Juliet meet. Remember, though, that Romeo is walking into the party completely and desolately in love with Rosaline and determined not to have a good time. But then, Romeo's first line in this scene, he's asking what the name of the beautiful girl across the room is. So Benvolio, it seems, was right, in that if Romeo will just check out other girls, he'll quickly get over Rosaline. But come on. That quickly? When he first sees Juliet, he says, "Oh, she doth teach the torches to burn bright," which is a nice Shakespearean way of saying she's hot. But he also says, "Did my heart love till now?" While the whole love at first sight shtick is pretty cool here, if anything, it reveals exactly how fickle and juvenile Romeo is. Did he actually love Rosaline? Does he actually love Juliet? Or is he just in love with the idea of being in love? At any rate, right before Romeo makes his move on Juliet, and oh, the kid's got moves, Juliet's cousin, Tybalt, spots him crashing their party and immediately asks Lord Capulet to kill him. Capulet is very chill about it, though, and vehemently turns Tybalt down 3 times. Tybalt, who we already saw itching for battle in scene 1, he has to swallow his pride this time. For now. Romeo then swoops towards Juliet. Now, although we have Romeo's perspective in this scene, we have to decide whether or not Juliet has equally been checking Romeo out from across the room, or if she's just seeing him for the first time when he approaches her. Either way, with a few smooth words and flirty phrases, Romeo and Juliet go from just meeting to some hot kissing. And even though we like to see couples get together on stage, we can't help but feel like the whole encounter escalates rather quickly. But the two are in love, as much as 2 teenagers can be in love after talking for 60 seconds. And also, people are quick to forget that moments ago Romeo was in love with some other girl named Rosaline who rejected him. So does that make Juliet the rebound girl? The act ends with a tragic plot twist that we all saw coming. Romeo and Juliet each separately discover that their newest crush is also part of their family's sworn enemy. As Juliet puts it, "My only love sprung from my only hate, too early seen unknown and known too late," indicating that she feels unable to resist the rushing feelings of love she's experiencing and consequently is trapped in what she knows is a dangerous web of love and enmity. The act ends on this dour note of sudden, confused love. Just as Romeo and Juliet hit it off, they realize the enormous obstacles that their family's mutual hate of one another will play in keeping them apart. Although most audiences are eager to get to this more familiar plot point in the story, Act 1 overall exists to give us the full exposition, establishing not only the conflicts between the Capulets and Montagues, but also the internal conflicts existing in the worlds of Romeo and Juliet individually. Romeo possesses a turbulent, idealistic spirit that has the tendency to affix itself to the latest person he sees with a violent, hyperbolized passion. Juliet, only 13 years old, feels the pressures of an unwelcome adult world while she may be eager to escape from. Act 1 really brings into question the motivations of these characters, forcing us to ask if they fell in love with their soulmate at first sight, or if they're just 2 mismatched pieces of tinder and flint about to spark a dangerous flame of love. So, what do you think about Romeo and Juliet so far? Is it possible to fall in love at first sight? Is it possible for teenagers to experience love in its truest sense? Let me know what you think in the comments below. And now that the stage is set, let's watch on to see what becomes of these 2 households and their star-crossed lovers in Act